Well, welcome to the next Sunday Extra podcast. This is season 3, episode 8, and I am back.
Yeah.
We should be welcoming you.
I guess so.
Welcome back, Brian.
Well, thank you. It's good to feel welcome. I have been listening. I would like to say I've been watching, but I'm more of a podcast person. So I've been walking in the neighborhood, listening to all of you have a grand old time without me.
How we just went off the rails the last couple
Totally
of weeks
went off
when you
the
weren't
rails.
here to guide us.
We've been talking all about Habakkuk and... Not really. No. We haven't. If you haven't been listening for a while, we are not talking about minor prophets.
It's like, maybe you have the wrong podcast.
But it was nice because then I didn't have to worry about how the Sunday podcast was going.
I like how you worked that
well
in
done.
there.
Yeah, we just wrapped up
have been listening.
a series of messages on, anxiety called Anxious for Nothing. And Matt, you did a great job.
Thank you.
And you ended, I would say this, because you talked a lot about, you've been building this pyramid of what Philippians 5 through 9 has kind of been building to, and you introduced this filter of sorts of how we can deal with our thinking in this last message, and you kind of sparked everyone's interest by talking about, different filters. I think everyone groaned when we had the thought about using a life straw to drink purified water out of the Trinity. I was sitting next to my daughter and she says, I don't think that's a good idea. It's not.
Raising her right, Brian.
But then you mentioned coffee filters, and I think you had people's full attention. I was talking to...
Not yours, though. I
was out. I didn't get it. But I will say I have had glasses of tea where the tea bag busted and you drink the tea leaves, and it's the same, okay. I assume, as coffee grounds in your... Nah. But I talked to someone from the coffee team on Sunday, and she said whatever Pastor Matt said about coffee inspired people, because we went through so much coffee on Sunday. Wow. So people were...
Okay. They were paying attention.
They were paying attention. They want to make sure our coffee filters were working.
I hope they paid attention to the more important parts, other than just how great coffee is and why we need a coffee filter. But
the bean juice.
Yes. But you did say, we do these podcasts because we're only scratching the surface. It's like we're just scraping the sod off of the deep earth that is there in these topics. And so I wanted to talk a little bit around the table about some of the other things because I was just a spectator on Sunday. I was still on vacation technically yesterday. So I wasn't there for the rehearsal and the discussion about all the things going in. So I thought the way you started off with thinking about things that we're thinking about, what all kind of went into that thought, if you will, about being very mindful. I can't get away from all the brain talk about thoughts, but how did we arrive at that thought of thinking about what we're thinking about and taking thoughts captive and kind of going through that filter of thinking?
Well, I think it's straight out of verse 8, he says, think about these things. Mm-hmm. So there's this strong implication that there's thinking about certain things, and we just don't tend to think a whole lot in modern day America. Mm-hmm. I think if you look at even just I don't think that they require logic anymore in school, and core classes that used to be there back.
Did they have classes
back in the 1900s when some of us went to school.
How do you teach math without logic?
Well, there you go, right? But
do they teach feelings?
2 plus 2 doesn't. I have heard that 2 plus 2 doesn't always equal 4. So no, I don't agree with that.
Sure.
But, okay. So I think it's a thing that we just don't do anymore, and it's not automatic. It's not normal. We are in such an emotionally driven. I think the "I think therefore I am" statement, right? Mm-hmm. Would today it would be "I feel therefore I am," and that's just kind of really, where we're at. So So it's really important. And I wanted to challenge people with actually think, and so it's just because if we don't, we end up being led by our feelings or being led by our heart, to go down a road that you just, you go down that road, but you don't necessarily want to be down that road once you get there.
I do wonder, and you guys can weigh on this, like I think you talked about in the first message about different stresses and anxieties that we have over time, and one of those was, I can't remember if you specifically said social media or if it was just technology or if it was cell phones or whatever all that was. I know there's something in that ballpark, and I'm wondering if just the amount of information that we get in a day. I think somebody said once that in the amount of information that, say, someone in the days of George Washington, the amount of information that they would have been able to acquire over the course of their lifetime is contained in one issue of the Sunday New York Times.
Yeah.
And we get so much more than that on a weekly basis, that if we're getting so much information and a lot of it is very emotionally charged, like I'm thinking over the past couple of weeks with the unfortunate incident back in Utah, there's just been all of this stuff coming and coming and coming. You don't have time, or you just don't feel like you have time to think and to slow down and process that. So all you have are feelings. I'm wondering if some of that is just this, we're in this barrage of, we're just in reaction mode.
Well, yeah, and I think what's fascinating, I think this is very fitting that we are, we've sort of converted this room that we're in. If you're watching us on video, you see all of the books around us. So this, was a library, is a library, and on one hand, people say people don't read anymore. And the problem is people don't read books anymore. People don't actually read helpful things anymore. If you were to actually be able to measure how much you read through scrolling, I think that people could read a whole lot of books. But they're reading them like one post at a time, and you just get consumed with that. And then a lot of what we read, on social media and those things, it's, I'm not saying it's all bad, okay? I mean, yes, there's a way to stay connected with friends and all of that and share pictures, and you can, see pictures of your grandkids who live in another state and all of those things. And, I'm kind of at that place in life. I don't know, Luke, you can't relate to this, but you guys, like, maybe there's somebody you went to high school with or whatever, and you happen to be friends with them, and they post a picture, and you're like, wow, so-and-so's looking old. And then I look in the mirror, man. That's me. I went to high school with that person. We graduated together. But by and large, what we're reading, it's just opinion. It's speculation. It's opinion. And in fact, it was kind of interesting. Somebody came up to me. I had lots of good, short conversations yesterday, and somebody came up to me and they said something about, wow, that list in verse 8, and we spent a lot of time just kind of like unpacking each one of the virtues that Paul lists. They said, I don't think that you could say that there's very much of that, in the news. Sure. Or in social media. And so if that's what you're consuming on a regular basis, how is that affecting your life, and particularly with this topic on anxiety? I mean, so here we go, Jeremy. You don't strike me as a big social media guy, so let's just say any form of media. If you were glued to, the news, or, say you just went after social media and you were just really into it for an hour, like, would you typically feel more energized and refreshed after consuming media for an hour, or would you maybe feel more anxious?
So I will answer that in no, I don't follow hardly any social media at all. But when I like peek over someone else's shoulder who's scrolling through, oh yeah, it just like
Look over your
boils my blood. Just 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I'm like, "Rah! That's wrong. Rah!" And so,
Yeah.
if that answers your question. And then I decide once again, I reaffirm my commitment. Yeah, I need to not be on social media.
Well, it's kind of like, look, I want to hear your answer in just a second, but you just made me think. Again, this was before we had social media the way that we did, but you guys know talk radio, right?
Yeah.
So the early 2000s, I had an outside sales job, and there was a point where I had to stop listening to talk radio. Now, it's just like, because it would just get you too fired up, and it's somebody's opinions about things, and they're just rehearsing the exact opposite of what Paul lists in Philippians 4:8.
Right, and to give just a little bit more insight in that, I think there are good uses, like you've said, for social media, for Facebook, for whatever. You scroll through, you see your family, you see your grandkids. I don't have grandkids yet, just FYI. You can keep up with people like that, but what I see, or what I would probably do, is like, oh, that's a cute picture. Yeah, that's a cute picture. Oh, something politically charged. Oh, something spiritually charged. Oh, yeah, that's what I'm going to grab hold of. So I'm like, I don't need that. So there's good uses for social media. I just know my tendency is going to be to grab onto that controversial thing and then go down rabbit trails that I don't need to spend the rest of my evening fighting in my own mind about. Anyway.
So as our resident millennial, Luke,
I'm not the most active social media person. So if you're like, hey, Luke, I'm gonna check all your feeds. I'm not a huge poster, but I think my problem is in the consuming realm. Like I've noticed, I think, just to answer your question, like if I'm spending any amount of time on social media, I'm like, oh man, I could have been actually reading a book or actually spending more focused time with my kids. Like, I think sometimes for my generation, I don't think we realize how addicted we can be very quickly, and how we can really feel just anxious about life, or because we procrastinated. That's probably the biggest thing for me, of like, oh man, I've procrastinated the important things that I really want to focus on. But I think there's also a realm of like, it can be so helpful. I think they're the same things that can really be distracted. If I'm seeking out, hey, I want to learn more on something, there are certain just technology tools that are so helpful. Like I think just what's in our hands when we hold our phones, like we have so much power to be able to learn about something. And so there are times where I'm like, oh man, when I'm being intentional with it, it can be extremely helpful. There's certain, whether that's YouTube subscriptions or channels that I check out that actually been really helpful for my perspective over time. But that requires intentionality and not just mindlessly scrolling through whatever just comes up on my feed. Whenever I get in that realm, I usually feel more anxious about life. But the times that I actually am seeking out, hey, what would be helpful for me? What questions do I have that I need to get answered? That's a great usage. Because there's a lot of Christians or people with a biblical worldview have been posting a lot more content that can be really helpful for people's perspective.
Yeah. So, Brian, you're an average. Or not, sorry, average.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
I just looked up something, and the question I asked was average.
Captain Mediocrity.
You need to be excellent. This is why Bill and Ted be excellent, to one another.
Wow.
Yes.
Party on, Wayne.
Do you know?
I do know that one.
Okay.
The excellent adventure. Okay, all right.
But you are an avid reader.
Oh, there you go.
You're usually always reading something, and just think about if you read 15 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, an hour a day, how many books you could read over the course of a year, right? So, where I got tripped up here, I just did a quick Google search, right? The average American spends around 2 hours and 16 minutes a day on social media in 2025. All right. So that's like this Google's aggregated overview answer. All right, when you just type that
Go
in.
AI.
Yeah, go AI. So anyway, I mean that's a lot of time, right? So again, we're not anti-social media here. We're not anti-technology, but we have at our disposal tools, and tools can be used for good, or they could be used for less than good. So I think this is why we have to think about what we're thinking about, and there's even this, so I don't remember the source or who said it, but there was this thing where once they put that continuous scroll in, like that was a game changer, because people, like, you never had to like go to another page. You could just literally scroll for hours, and that keeps you there because there's always something else, popping up. So the big point is we typically don't think about our thoughts. We just feel the feelings, and we don't realize that there are thoughts that precede the feelings.
And I think there's I won't say a game, but there's a game being played, sort of. It makes it sound more nefarious than it necessarily is. But the way that God made our brains is if a question is asked, we want either to supply the answer or to find out the answer. And so all of those clickbait titles cause this question to come up in your head that you just desire to figure out what the answer is. And then I don't know how many times I've gone down that road where there's a question in this title, you watch the video and there's not actually an answer in there, but then you see another video or post or whatever that's like, oh, well, maybe and that's how you get down the doom scrolling. If I'm trying to figure out what the answer is, or I have an opinion, this is a wrong that needs to be righted, and I hope I get to the end of this story and the good guy wins in the end, or whatever those things are, and it's never ending. It is a bottomless hole of other videos or posts or comments or whatever the thing is. And I think, at least for me, some of that anxiety is I'm not getting to a conclusion. It's just more questions. The more you dive, the more questions there are, and you're like, there's nothing solid to set your feet on. But even with the books, like I think I mentioned this on here, but I had to curb way back the number of books I was reading, because I was always reading a book and there still wasn't time to think about the book, or there wasn't time to think about what I was thinking about the book or whatever. There's just always something in my ears or something in front of my eyeballs or whatever. So I could read a lot, but I wasn't necessarily processing it or thinking about it or asking, like, what if this is actionable from God's perspective? What if it isn't? All those kinds of things. Like, I think there still needs to be some. This is sick, but I've been watching some videos on YouTube about how important it is to be bored from time to time. Like, actually shut everything off and just be silent for a while. And you want to talk about being stressed out after you've had all that dopamine and adrenaline the whole time, to just have nothing going on. You're like, oh yeah, I have to be doing something. And if you can let that calm down, you can actually start thinking. And
have you seen those, like, there's some of those like challenges where, if you can survive in this secluded cabin in the woods for 30 days with no technology, you win like millions of dollars, and people can't do it. To me, I'm like, that would be awesome. Where can I sign up for that? But I think that one of the biggest problems is we are afraid to be alone with our thoughts.
Yeah.
Because then we actually have to be confronted with some things that we don't want to deal with.
And also just being alone with God, I think, is another thing. I think, that just as throughout this series we've been talking about, like, replacing it with prayer. And like, prayer is the opposite of, in a lot of ways, with technology, where we're getting opinions from other people. But prayer, just being alone with God and asking Him and trying to focus on His Word. And I think that's been a challenge for me just in this series of just like, how often do I want to turn to find an answer when I instead just need to turn to prayer, really to seek, land on that as opposed to land on finding answers from other people.
Do you have a thought? Okay.
No, I'm good.
I had a question. So you mentioned, Matt, that a question came up that we should talk about in this, but it raised a question that I've had too. The question is, in all cases, is fear and worry and anxiety a sin? So that's the question. But what I find interesting is I can't remember which book that Paul wrote in the Bible where he's talking about being away from people and he hopes to meet them soon. It's a typical thing in a Paul letter, like, I wish I could be there, but I can't be there, so I'm writing this letter instead. And somewhere in there he uses, at least some translation says, I am anxious for you, or I'm anxious to see you, or like, you said don't be anxious about anything, and you're anxious to do whatever. So It kind of raises the question, is anxiety always a sin?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. So this question came up, we literally just finished filming last week's podcast on Monday, and then I think it was that evening or the very next morning this question came up, and it was a great question. It was particularly for some of the students, and so our students, so we do Wednesday night programming for our students, and our students are a part of the service by design, by intention. They're in the worship service, and then they serve in different areas. And so the students were really paying attention, and there was this question of is it always wrong? Because we looked at the passage from Matthew, and Jesus says 3 times, "Don't worry, don't be anxious," and then it's well, is fear and worry and anxiety is that always a sin or not? Was the question that they had, because they said it seemed like maybe there's times where it could not be. So I think it's helpful to talk about that for a minute to unpack that. So basically what you have to look at is we talked about this before, the Bible was not written in English, right? So there's our English words, and then there's the original Greek words. And so there's the word fear, phobios, which you get phobia, arachnophobia, any kind of phobia that you could think of. It's a fear of, right? And then there's the word worry or anxiety, and this is why I took a couple minutes in the second week when we switched to the NLT. All of a sudden, it's don't worry about anything, instead pray about everything, which is different than what the ESV says. Well, it's the same word, worry or anxiety. It's the same word, miranamo. Okay, so you've got fear, and then you've got worry/anxiety, are 2 very different things. They come from two words. So, one of the ways to think about this is fear is kind of a present tense reaction to something. There's a perceived danger. There's something overwhelming. But the thing with fear is, and we'll get to this in just a minute, is it can be, for lack of a better word, it can be good. It can be sanctified, if you will, if the fear, depending on what the object of the fear is. So there's fear as in reverent awe of God, because we say we need to fear the Lord. Or fear can be sinful, or it can kind of be neutral. When you look at worry, again, worry and anxiety is this state of mental preoccupation. There's this divided focus. We in the series we're talking about how it's a divided mind and a restless heart, weighted down instead of trusting in God and His provision. So you got fear as a present tense reaction, but worry or anxiety, depending on which English word you use, is a future-oriented state, and that rehearses possible problems. It tries to control the things that are uncontrollable, if you stay in that future-oriented state where you're constantly worried about what's out here in front of me, and you're not actually even maybe living in the present, then that's wrong. So there is a distinction between fear and worry/anxiety. And so going back to fear, though, fear, it can be sinful whenever there's a displaced trust in God. Like I am not trusting in God. So in Isaiah, Isaiah 41, fear not, for I am with you. We see this in the Old and the New Testament. Is this idea of don't fear something, right? Fear can be, so there's sinful, then there's the holiness, this reverent fear of God. When it's fear of the Lord, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Well, that means this reverent respect for who God is and what he has said. That's fear of the Lord. I trust so much in who he is and what he says that I'm going to go ahead and obey him. That's fear of the Lord. And that's a good fear. Like, we are to fear God and fear no man. Then this neutral to positive part can be if it's a natural reflex to danger. Okay, so if there is a car swerving toward you and you sort of jump back if you're walking, or you jerk the wheel because you're driving, well, that's part of this way we've been designed to react to potential threats. We have this fight or flight response. Also, another way to think of it is, okay, I know that I can't fly, right? So because I know that I can't fly, I don't go up to the top of 10-story buildings and stand on the edge and jump off with no parachute. Like, I in that sense, I am afraid of falling to my death. Mm-hmm. But that's a good fear, because that keeps me from doing something stupid. Mm-hmm. So fear, again, it can be good when it's fear of the Lord. It can be bad and sinful when it's fear of something else. But it can also be neutral if it's going to prevent me from doing stupid things. So it depends. The answer is fear a sin? Well, it depends on what the object of your fear is, right? But when it comes to worry and anxiety, which again, they're the same Greek word, it's really always in the sinful category. It's not being trustful of God. Scripture is it calls believers away from this ongoing, controlling worry, and we need to focus on God and who he is and how he can help us. So again, just to kind of summarize this, fear, it is like an alarm bell. It can alert us to danger. It can drive us to trust in God. If it is unchecked, now then it can sort of paralyze you, which is not good. Worry and anxiety is more like background noise, where it's just sort of there you've got this divided heart and mind, and you're always imagining the worst case scenario of things, and this could be this way. And Jesus calls us to not worry. Paul it does the same thing, and I think that one it's not necessarily presented as ever good. Now, the kind of the sub question that you asked a minute ago is, I think there's a distinction of a healthy concern. Okay, that's where when Paul says I'm anxious for, right? So he uses the word anxious, and I'd have to go back and look at that exact verse, and I'd want to see. Greek word, I want to see if it was the same Greek word or a different variation of the same root. But really, if there's this thing that drives you to prayer and motivates you in the proper way, then it's not the kind of anxious worry that I'm just stewing on something that I can't do anything about anyway. So this temporary concern that comes up, that really what Paul is it's that what should it do, and what does it? It drives you to prayer and wise action. So, a parent, or a parent or grandparent who has, a son or daughter or a grandchild who is not yet a follower of Jesus, and if they said, I'm anxious for them to hear the gospel and become a follower of Jesus, I would want to, what do you mean by that? And it's just, I really want to tell them the gospel, and I'm going to be praying that they will open their heart and they'll surrender to Jesus. Well, that might be a healthy, it's a healthy concern. It's not the ongoing, persistent, future-oriented
It's not debilitating
state.
and
Yeah. So that's kind of how I would describe the nuances of it. And again, it's kind of hard to get into all that in the time that we have on a Sunday morning, but that's how I would look at those distinctions. Is that and I was using in the message, I kind of lumped together fear, worry, and anxiety. And the reason I did that without making the distinction between fear and worry and anxiety being different Greek words was I was trying to get at what is it that people are experiencing. Mm-hmm. So somebody might say it's fear, but it's actually worry or anxiety. They might, so I went ahead and used that word. Looking back on it, maybe I should have made the distinction in the first message. But I think it was a great question, and the point is we don't want to get into sin. And usually, here's, I would say, just kind of a final thought on that. Depending on the object of my fear, it could be sinful or not. Usually, given what fear or given what anxiety and worry is, it's not good, and it's probably moving into the sinful side rather than something healthy.
Well, as you were talking about that, there's a famous crop family story of one of the kids ended up, like you mentioned, jumping off 10-story buildings. This child was higher up than they had ever been before, and we were trying to get them off of the thing, and debilitated by fear, like could not. It's probably an hour and a half I couldn't get up to them to get them off. They had to come to me a little bit, and that's what was kind of thing. So I'm wondering, like, there's the fear that turns me to God. Then I think where this kid was, I have forecasted a future state of damage if I, like, whatever was in their head, if I do this, I'm going to hurt myself. And I don't trust my dad for whatever reason that is. And so I am now fearful of the potential that's out there. I'm not fearful of the thing that's right in front of me. I'm fearful of what could happen in the future. And so it's kind of this cyclical thing of now I'm anxious because of my fear, but I'm now I'm fearful of the thing that it's all kind of around this. I can't control the outcome. And so that is driving all of this up.
Yeah.
Kind of sounds like, so as a distinction between when fear is more like anxiety as opposed to when is fear more protective or reverent, it's, I don't know. I could be making that up. I don't know.
No, I think what I would say is sometimes we have a hard time. Again, we have the feeling, and somebody's going to feel the feeling, and they may not know in the moment this nuance of like, oh, is this actual fear or is this worry or anxiety? So again, that's why I lumped them together. But then if you start to feel something, then the question is like, well, again, it goes back to the thought. What is it? Am I thinking that, I'm all worked up about this thing that could be out in the future, that might be, or I am all worked up right now because there is a 500-pound bear in front of me, and I might need to act appropriately. So the question could be is, what is the object of my fear, worry, or anxiety? And once you identify the object, that can help determine is it good, is it neutral, or is it wrong? And I need to just really here's the biblical response I would say is like, okay, when you get into fear, is you need to remember God, his presence, and his power. And if you're into worry or anxiety, then the response is pray with thanksgiving and cast your cares, your worries, your anxieties onto him. Ask him for help. That's, kind of the point. So, yeah. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think we've covered lions and bears. I don't think we've covered tigers.
Okay.
On this episode,
Oh.
but I think we've.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I think the trusting God's presence, power, and provision, I think is really helpful. And just when, for me as a dad, I think a couple weeks ago we talked about just looking towards the future, but I think just, what could happen with your kids is God can provide for a variety of things for your kids, and just remembering, hey, God has provided in the past, he'll provide in the future, and God's protected in the past. I don't know what he'll do in this situation, but I can trust him just in the future. And so I think I think sometimes people can get, that question from in the student context, I was really encouraged that they were trying to wrestle that through of, hey, how do am I wrong if I'm giving into fear? Because I think sometimes for young men who are students, I remember when I was 18, I thought it was invincible, and so there is actually a healthy fear of certain things that can really ruin your life if you're not being wise. And so I think, if you can go to the extreme of, I'm not going to fear anything, and that actually is not wise. We want to truly fear God, and what's the object of our fear? One of I think the realities is fearing God, that he's given us limits in life, and because he's given us limits, we need to trust him and not trust ourselves.
Well, and that he has created a cause and effect world, right? So I mean, this is simply, why do we not get up, like wherever you live, and every city, every town has that, like, you don't want to be there after dark place, right? Where it's a rougher part of town. I don't care where you live. Like, here we have some, like South Lake and Trophy Club, or further north from us, they're pretty nice, high dollar place, right? There's got to be what's the worst street in South Lake? Okay? I'm being a little funny here, but you know what I'm saying, though. But we know there's certain places that you would not go. Like, if you really have fear of the Lord, which that means, okay, God has created things the way that he has. There's a cause and effect world. I'm not going to walk down that street by myself at 2 a.m. because there might be a dude with an AK-47, like what you experienced. Remember that, Jeremy? You shared with that,
Cambodia.
right?
Oh yeah.
So
legit,
yeah. Right? So we don't do that. That's a good fear, it's why do we lock our doors at night? Well, because there are people who are not followers of Jesus, and people who don't live in God's ways. And I want to at least make it more difficult for them to get in my house in the middle of the night, should they try to come in and, relieve me of some stuff in my house, So there could be good motivation. But I'll tell you, the most encouraging thing for me was that, and again, I think I loved having our students. We made this shift a couple of years ago that the students are there, and there's where the first service group sits, kind of in the first couple rows off to the east, and then the second service, they're more kind of like right up front and center.
They're shorter,
and but it's just having the energy that they bring, and then also the fact that they're listening and they're asking those kinds of questions. I mean, that's amazing. So
I only say they're shorter because I think some of the more taller, we've had to move them off to the east because they block camera shots.
That's right. We don't want to block the camera shot. That's really what it's about, right, Brian?
We have very healthy children. They're good and tall.
Good and tall. There you go.
Yeah, I had just a couple of thoughts, particularly on what you were saying about the anxiety, the worry is future oriented. What could be. I'm reminded you summed it up at the very end of the sermon that worry and anxiety is asking what if, this nebulous question, but I think one distinction between what you're how you're explaining fear and how you're explaining anxiety is fear. It's not only in the present, but it has specific parameters around it. A car is swerving towards me, and so there's certain parameters. If I stay in this lane, I'm going to get hit. If I can get one lane over, I'm not going to get hit. If there's a bear in front of me, there's specific things I need to do, not need to do. But when you start projecting forward what if and things that haven't happened, then there's no parameters and there's no limit. And so it's so easy for that to start snowballing bigger and bigger and broader because there's literally no limit to how far and how wide that can go. So I think that's another distinction that came to mind, is those parameters, or fear versus anxiety, worry, that can end up just overtaking us because of that.
Yeah, I think that's really good. There's usually an object of our fear, and it can be momentary, and we can deal with that specific situation. But the worry and anxiety may not have an object. It's just this, well, what if this, and what if that? And, in fact, it is something I want to get into, in a few minutes, Brian. Is just, it goes back to why we need to think about our thinking. Is because if there is no parameters, and when our minds just totally run completely free and wild, like that picture of the dog that I showed,
so happy,
then that's where we can get into all kinds of trouble. So that's good.
So I was thinking you were sort of going down a particular road by talking about when the serpent deceived Eve and Adam, and we got into sin to start with, that there was a statement that God gave an order or command to Adam and Eve of what to do in the Garden of Eden. The serpent questions God's motives in that, or questions, did she understand what God said accurately, or whatever those things. And I don't know, the Bible doesn't say that it dredged up a fear in Eve or whatever, but she instead of going like, that's a really good question, serpent, I'm going to go check in with God and ask if that's true, or, I'm not going to ask that. I'm just going to take your third-party information. I'm going to take that as accurate. I'm going to believe that. And that launches us into a whole lineage of sin and fear and all of those things. So then you mentioned, as you were getting into the coffee filter of what to think about, it starts off with whatever is true, and you spent a long time talking about what is creation nailed down. We're really kind of sunk on the rest of it. And I thought you ended that with a really interesting phrase, like, before you go down to the filter, you have to recognize that there are true things that aren't honorable and just. And I'm like, oh, what are true things that aren't? Like, I was trying to play that mind game. But then, you and I were talking before we started recording, and you were like, could we talk about lies that we believe? So there are things like what the serpent did to Eve, where here is a lie, and she chose, before she bit the apple, she bit on that lie, and she swallowed that. That there are lies that we believe that they're not based in reality. So thought you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think, I was just trying to think through some categories of some things, but so there is truth and untruth. I mean, that's kind of the big distinction. But I should have come with a better example because you just brought this up. But there are things that are true, but they're not pure, right? I mean, that's probably the easiest one. So it can pass the first test of true, but then it doesn't pass one of the others, so therefore it doesn't make its way through the filter, right? But when it comes to the truth, I think that's the part that we wrestle with. So here are just maybe some lies or some confusion, just try to think of some big categories. How about your personal worth and identity? I have no value. I'm worthless. I mean, if you believe that, well, that's a lie. And there's a lot of people that believe that. And it's like, no, God, you were made in the image of God, right? You have value as a human being. God made all the rest of the plants and the animals, and then he made humans, and humans are the pinnacle of his creation. Humans are the ones that will, those that are make peace with God will be forever in eternity with him. And now, the big question that's out there is, are there going to be animals, and all that kind of stuff.
Do all dogs?
Do all dogs go to heaven? I don't know the answer to that. Mm-hmm. We will know when we get there, right? And I'm okay with that too. It's like, I'm okay with that ambiguity. Some people are like, I gotta know. I'm like, there's just a lot of things I'm comfortable with not knowing, because that's just the way it is, right?
It's not going to make a difference anyway. You're not going to find out if you demand.
I've decided to follow Jesus, so I'm going to be there, whether or not, dogs that I've had in the past that So, I don't know if they decided to follow Jesus, because some of them were good and some of them weren't so good. But we know for us, it's not based on our goodness. It's, so can the animals confess Jesus as Lord? I don't know.
Not in our language.
Another lie is like, my past defines me. Like, because of my past, like, I can't ever do anything different. I can't ever be anything different. I mean, that's like the heart of the gospel is, we were, Jesus did, and now we can be, right? So those are just lies. You think about circumstances that we're in. I can control everything if I try hard enough. That's a lie if you believe that. Mm-hmm. I just got to try harder and I can control it. No, there's some things you cannot control. Things will never change. Now, you may choose not to change, but that doesn't mean things will never change. Or the opposite is, things are always going to stay the same. Either one of those are untruths, because we're constantly moving forward in time. Things change, the seasons change. We're kind of at that point right now.
Tomorrow's fall.
Tomorrow's fall. Is it?
I looked it up. Yeah.
Tomorrow's fall.
Because today's the equinox.
It's only 95 degrees today. I mean, man, just a few weeks ago we were at the 99s, and I'm looking forward to that day when we walk outside in the morning and it's cool and crisp, but I'm like, I need to go back in and get a sweatshirt, I wait for that day. But so that's things about our circumstances. We believe all kinds of lies, and these lies have big effects on our behaviors when it comes to success and happiness. If I just get blank, then I'll finally be happy. Well, how much is enough? Just one more. Just one more. Yep. Just one more. And then the other part of that lie is, well, more is always better. There's that saying, well, if a little is good, then more must be better. Now, maybe that's true on some things, but more isn't always better. I literally once was walking and I heard this guy. He was talking on the phone to somebody, and he was kind of dressed like a little more of a gangsta type guy, and he literally, he's on his phone and he's like, mo money, mo problems. That's what he said to the guy he was on the phone with. And I was like, okay, well, we think more money is better. That's going to be the answer to all my problems. So there you go. How about relationships? There's lies about relationships. It could be the side of, I don't need anyone. And that's part of this rugged individualism, the American, especially this is where you start crossing in like this rugged individualistic American idea, and people come with this idea of like, just me and Jesus. Just me and Jesus. And I mean, there's a small measure of truth, because each and every one of us have to make our own personal decision to surrender to Jesus. Like what my parents did, or what my spouse does, or what my kids do, or my grandkids do. Like, I have to decide for myself. But then that's the only thing. We come into the kingdom individually, but then we are in a community of people. I mean, the church is the people, and we need people. In our lives, we were made for relationship with God, relationship with other people, and then we were talking about this kind of over lunch, which is all the stuff that's kind of swirling around right now, and And so another lie people believe sometimes is, well, if I forgive them, then that means it's okay. No, those don't have anything to do with anything. Like, there are awful, wicked, horrible, heinous things that people do. And like, those should be punished. There's laws against them. But if you're the victim of one of those heinous things, you need to get to the place to forgive the person. So forgiveness is not condoning, it's not accepting, it's you know, at that point, I mean, it's like God says we need to forgive, right? And then I think the thing, you know, for me, when I if I'm having trouble forgiving somebody, what's really helpful for me, and like this very kind of like sobering, like shake me back into reality, is I'm like, what about my sin against God? Right? Is what that person has done against me more than my sin against God? Well, of course not. So God forgives me in Christ, and I'm commanded to forgive. And then really in the end, forgiveness is the path to healing for us. Like, if you're holding on to it, then that you talk about worry and anxiety. I mean, there's just going to all kinds of physiological, just all kinds of problems. So that's another thing, is like, it is possible. You know, there's this great book, challenging book, Total Forgiveness by R.T. Kendall.
I've been reading it, and I just finished it.
Yeah, I like to say
it's challenging.
You want a book that'll mess you up in a good way. I mean, that's the book, right? And so he uses the example of like, it is possible to simultaneously forgive somebody and testify at their trial. If they broke the law, then they need to be punished justly under the law. So you can forgive them and testify. That, you know, those aren't an opposite. So I mean, these are just some categories of lies. So when we think about, is it true? Then, well, is it in the category of truth, or is it some other lie that I'm believing?
So I guess a question out of all of that would be, in the spirit of thinking about what I'm thinking about, how do I identify, this is for the table, or I'll ask it a different way. How have you guys been able to discern, I am now believing a lie, versus I think, because I'm believing a lie, that I'm believing reality? I think that's part of the issue, is I start to think that lie is real. Somehow I've got to split that out and figure out, no, the thing I'm believing is a lie. Reality is in a different location. How have you guys kind of sorted that out? Because we've all believed lies from time to time.
Usually too late. After the fact.
Well, yes. That is true.
Yeah, I think one thing has been just helpful for me is just like, you know, I think part of it just starts with like choosing to obey God. I think like one of the things that's been helpful for me, just having finished Antioch, was the 5-year training program. One of the key things that came out for that was, if I walk with God, things become more clear over time. I may not have the answers right now, but if I continue to walk with God, He can allow it to be more clear over time. And so I think one of the first questions I ask is like, am I walking with God right now in obedience to Him, or is there an area of my life that I know is just outside of His boundaries? And so if I'm wanting to get an answer and I'm living in disobedience, there's not really a guarantee that I'll be walking in the light. The verse that comes to mind is like, if we walk in the light, we have fellowship with God, and we have also fellowship with other people. And so I think the reality is like, if I walk with God and I'm obedient to Him, He has the source of all wisdom. He's the one who's ultimately wise. And so there's a better chance I might be believing something true as I'm obeying. So I think that's one part, but I think your question is more of in the discernment realm of like, how do you...
But you are saying, like, if I'm ramped up on anxiety and I'm living in this state of future consequences or whatever that I'm imagining might happen out there in the future, that if I'm focused there and have not practiced what is in verse 7 and 6 about giving it to the Lord, I can't see my situation accurately. Is that sort of what you're saying? So I wouldn't be able to tell if it's a lie or truth because I've added fog to reality because I haven't gotten the anxiety in its proper place, which is with Jesus.
I think a way that, it's been said that's been helpful for me is like, as I walk with Jesus, things become more clear. Mm-hmm. And even though I've been a Christian for a long time, but if I choose to start disobeying God, things actually might become more dim.
Yeah. And
so, but I've also seen those who have really, they've been in a really tough life spot, but then they chose to, come to church, chose to really get serious about being in community, chose to walk with God. And I've seen their perspective actually become more clear over time. I'm like, oh, they're seeing things more clearly. Mm-hmm. And that's because I think they've walked with God. And so, there is the chance though that, wherever I'm at wherever people are at on their spiritual journey, they might be believing several lies that they've just not really dealt with, and God's gracious to us. And so I think one of the things that's been helpful for me is just praying also, God, would you help me to get clarity on this area that I don't, I think I see it correctly, but maybe I don't. Would you help me to see things from your perspective? And so I think both the asking God for his wisdom and then also walking in obedience have been two ways I've been really helpful of how do you discern, are you focused on what is true?
Yeah, I think my thoughts are very, very similar to Luke's, going down the same road of, you're asking the question almost like, is there some kind of like magic key or magic thing that we can recognize we're now in fear and in anxiety or worry, but it's built over spending regular time with God, spending regular time in God's Word, and that builds in us the ability to recognize. And so if there's one book that we can read that's going to help, it's the Bible. And it's not just read through it once, it's continuing to spend time in the Bible and his Word. But what Luke said about spending time in prayer, maybe even asking others who have wisdom. But I think one of the keys is doing that before you act. Because when there's just this nebulous cloud of worry and anxiety out there's nothing concrete laid down yet. It's just a nebulous cloud. But once you've acted, whether that's doing something, making a financial decision, lashing out verbally at someone, once there's action, now you've laid down a concrete path that you're on. Not that you can't go back and get forgiveness for that. You can always go back and get forgiveness. But once you've started laying down that path, now you've laid down something more concrete.
Now that thing has become reality.
Yeah, that has created a reality that's probably the wrong path. And so I think the prayer, the stopping to think, getting counsel from others before you act is a key moment in that.
And I think it also in the getting counsel for others, just for our audience members, I think just a question that has been really helpful for me has been asking someone who's farther ahead of you, just like, hey, do you think there's an area of my life that maybe my perspective's off? And, and that's a kind of scary question to ask, but that is a question where other Christians can see your life, and sometimes we all have blind spots, and so I think that's another way.
Well, that presupposes that there's people that know you well enough to actually know your perspectives on life. So it's a great answer. I love that, but I think this is why we have to be in community with people. This is why we need to. We need to know people, and we need people to know us. I always just kind of chuckle when people talk about their mentors that live hundreds or thousands of miles away,
or are dead and wrote books.
Right, and those kinds of people can be helpful.
Yes,
like I'm not discrediting that getting advice and input from people that aren't local. But if all you have are non-local mentors, I don't know that they're actually your mentor, and they certainly can't answer the question that you just posed, Luke. So So I mean, that's why we have groups here. Is, are you going to be best friends with everybody in your group? No, but you have a pool of people that you can start to get to know, and you can start to encourage each other. And I mean, if you spend a semester together and you have honest and open discussion, probably 4, 5, 6 weeks down the road, Luke, I would be able to hear what your perspective is. And if you came and asked me that question, I probably could give you an answer, but that's with you being real and me being real and us being able to have that discussion. So I want to just kind of add a summary thought to what they shared. I think the answer lies in basically the final thoughts that I gave. The two things is we've got to fill our mind with God's truth, and we've got to live our life God's way. So this goes back to, how do you know the truth? Well, you got to read God's word. There are too many lies out there. There are too many counterfeits. There's too much speculation. There's too much whatever, that you can't know it all. So you have to focus on the truth. You used to be in banking, and you studied the $100 bill, so you knew what the $100 bill. Well, you know how it felt, how it smelled, how it looked, and so that if a not real one,
Which
counterfeit
happened.
one, you just knew
instantly knew
this doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
Right. So, he used the feeling word. Well, again, some people experience things more through their feelings, but that's not. Feelings aren't totally wrong, but there's usually thoughts before them. So we've got to fill our mind with the truth, which is why Paul says, in the first one, whatever is true. So if we focus on things that are true, then it comes from God's word.
Small little banking side note in all that, which I think helps your image here. So you do touch enough bills that you can spot the ones that are wrong. But then someone, whatever they put into the paper that makes up an American dollar bill, there's this pen, you've probably seen it at grocery stores, whatever. They mark 20s all the time with these things, but it's a little pen, it looks like a highlighter, and you draw on it, and if it is a legit bill, it's yellow. If it is any other paper, it's black. So there's a chemical reaction. So even though I would feel the bill, like, I don't know about this, you'd still have this pen to verify. So I think where I would have a feeling, there was still an objective thing I could go back to verify that. And I think that's also where the Word of God comes to. Like, I have a weird feeling about this situation, but I can talk to God. I can go to the Bible and verify where I might be feeling off about things, and is that legit or not.
Yeah, that's perfectly sets up. So the next thing I was going to say is you got to fill your mind with the truth. But if I loved how your first answer, Jeremy, was usually like something like too late. So if I had ever start to feel or think or have the inclination that I know what the Bible says, but in my case that I'm starting down the wrong path, because if I know what the Bible says, the Bible is God's word, and the Bible is true, and the Bible is the objective standard, but I somehow feel like I get a pass or I'm in a special case, well, then there's something else going on that I need to wrestle down and I need to deal with. So
you have value before the Lord, but you're not that special.
Yeah, it's not like, of all, I get I don't get a special pass, but I mean, I've literally heard people say that. I know what the Bible says, but in my special case. And I just want to be like, did you just hear what you just said? Now, most of the time we aren't saying that out loud to someone, but we've all thought it. And then we have to wrestle that back and be like, okay, well, if that is what the Bible says, if that is God's word and that is the truth, now it's my job to get on God's page. It's not that he's somehow going to change and conform and somehow it'll be okay. And this is actually where, this term is cognitive dissonance. We have beliefs and we have behavior. And our behavior has to match up with our beliefs. And we can only go so long with having behavior that doesn't match with our beliefs. And then if we don't get our behavior in line with our beliefs, then usually what happens is we change our beliefs to match the behavior, the ungodly behavior that we want to either commit ourselves, or we somehow want to justify for someone else that we love, and we don't want to say that what they're doing is wrong. So that's why, though. But it all starts with thinking. You know, there is a thought, and let me see if I can find a quote that I meant to bring to this meeting or to this podcast. So,
yeah, I think the cognitive dissonance of just like, I think that, you know, that's been a real thing that I've struggled with at times, where it's like I'm acting this way and the Bible says this, and I can just remember times when I was a college student where that was, hey, I'm living this way, but you know the Bible says this, and those are times that, you know, I think, to your question earlier, how do you you know, when you're believing a lie, those are really hard times, honestly, because usually we've spent a number of years acting on that lie, and so and
there's investment in it.
Yeah. And so it's like, I think there is a level of, you know, it is difficult to change your perspective and then choose to actually live a different way. And so I think, you know, this is not super complex to, you know, the battle plan of Philippians 4-9, but it is hard. And it takes a lot of hard work sometimes to change your thinking. So but I think you found the quote, though.
You said a thing, this may not be the quote you had, but I thought it kind of ties into this. You at least said it in the 11 o'clock service, which we did not post because we had an unfortunate microphone accident in the middle of the second service. So I'm assuming you probably said it in the first service. You can check the tape. But it was, we as believers are called to do different things and to do things differently. So it is imperative that as we are following the Lord, just by the nature of being Christ followers, we can't get sucked into, well, this is how things go. This is what the culture does, or this is what my heart wants to do, or this is just what I see all around me. We are to do different things, which gets to that filter, because that's not what normal people do. But also we do things differently. So we have to make that choice. We have to be willing to say, I will choose to wrestle down this thing I've invested in and give that up, to, even though I don't want to, even though it's hard, to get over onto, you know, whatever God's page is on things, which has happened to me any number of times where I've been in a quiet time, and metaphorically speaking, God has slapped me upside the head. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I got to give this thing up. And then you start like justifying back into it. And he goes, no, okay, and drift back in, like, no, you know. Because I really want that lie to be true.
So I got another quote for you on that one.
Let's go.
All right. So
a quote upon a quote.
I do read a lot, so I like to collect quotes. But so based on what you just said and what I said of how we have to, you know, do things differently and do different things. This one's from A.W. Tozer.
Yes.
He says, the average professed Christian lives a life so worldly and careless that it is difficult to distinguish him from the unconverted man. That's not doing things different or doing things differently. You know, so like there should be a difference. When we stand out as the weird one, right, then that's because, well, my allegiance to Jesus is greater than me wanting to look cool right now. In fact, I love the fact, you know, we spend our Mondays reading through and praying over all the prayer requests. We had like, I don't know, 100 and something prayer requests today. And I loved that it was a student that submitted a prayer request.
It was a new student.
We see their names, but this student was basically praying, wanted prayer that they didn't try to be cool. And I'm like, that's awesome. Go, dude. That so you want to not be caught up in being cool, but you want to do what's right. So, the quote that I needed to find for a second I was using the whole coffee imagery, and like we're stewing and brewing something, right? So this was from a book, and so he says, consider the old proverb. It's not cited, so it's just like one of those, not from the Bible, but just a proverb out there. Sow a thought, reap an act. Sow an act, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny. So, I mean, that's the connection between, there's a thought, and then there's the ultimate destiny, direction that our life goes. And then the very next, so this is back to the author, he says, whether we like it or not, we're always sowing thoughts, since our minds are constantly dwelling on something, which is, the point I was trying to make is, we don't even realize that we're thinking, but we're always thinking about something. So we need to think about what we're thinking about.
Very good. Well, I'm sure there's more that we could say, but I think we're on the verge of out of time. Yeah,
I do want to just mention a couple of quick things.
Go for it.
So we went a lot quicker on verse 9, and and I just sort of highlighted again straight the words that Paul uses in verse 9. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. And I think, we're all men, we're husbands, we're fathers. We happen to also be pastors at Hope Church, but we lead in just in our own families. And I think what this is really a calling to us is, Paul says, what you saw in me, do it. Right? I mean, there's multiple places in the New Testament in his letters where we find Paul saying, imitate me as I imitate Christ. But these aren't just ideas. This is the way he lived. And he was so intentional about his living that he was directing people to use him as an example. And, we've joked around at different points about how kids are like sponges and they imitate us, and then, they'll do or say something, and it's like, where do they get that from? You look at your wife, and in fact, I was telling myself here, we were driving the other day somewhere, and somebody like, cut in front of me or did something, and one of my kids in the back seat goes like, what kind of driver are you? And then my wife, Jessica, just looks at me, and I was like, I knew where they got that one. It wasn't her fault. That one was mine. But I think the calling really in verse 9, and we didn't have time to like get into any of this. We could have gone for another hour on this, but just that we need to actually live it, which is why practice it daily in our whole lives. So Paul, he practiced what he preached, and he was preaching what he practiced. And so I think that's, I want to make sure we don't miss that. Like we don't miss that, the four of us, but then also that people don't miss that. The end of this whole passage is so do what you saw me do, and say what you saw me say, and just do what I did and you'll be good. It's kind of what he was saying, right? Because he was modeling the right things and good things. And then finally, brothers, I don't think we had time to really talk about this, but one of the resources that we listed in the recommended resources was Psalms for the Anxious. And I jacked this out of a book, but it was just the Bible, and it was an appendix. And it's literally a 24-page document of parts of different Psalms that if you're feeling anxious, you can read them. So, here's just the first couple here on the page. Psalm 3:3-7. But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. I call out to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear, though tens of thousands assail me on every side. Arise, Lord. Deliver me, my God. I mean, like, so that's like, okay, whatever I'm dealing with right now, that's helpful, you know? So there's 24 pages of ones that we didn't just give the reference, but we went ahead and like actually just copied it and printed it, you know, into the document. So I hope, you know, that people will see that and download that and use that and keep that close by. Jeremy, you've got the little card that we gave. If you're watching the video, hold that up. You know, we just wanted people to be able to take the passage and post it anywhere, that wherever you feel most anxious. So if it's like when you're brushing your teeth in the morning, then stick it to the bathroom mirror. If it's, you know, you're anxious before you get that cup of coffee, then put it by the coffee maker. You know, whatever it is.
Makes me think I should like tape it to the passenger side of my car, because I tend to make people anxious
Like
while I'm
on
driving.
the dashboard right there.
Like in front of the passenger, so that as I'm driving, they have something to deal with my driving.
It's not something for you to stare at. while
Oh
you're
no,
driving.
that would be unsafe.
Yes.
It's
But
for
to do with their feelings.
maybe it's it's before the airbag is deployed. They can read
Correct.
that.
Yes, there you go. Okay, well, so next Sunday, we're starting a brand new topic, looking at 7 different instances in the book of John when Jesus said he was something, and he uses 7 different metaphors to talk about his nature, his character, who he is, and who we can trust him to be. So I didn't know if you wanted to give any kind of preview to that coming up on Sunday, or we can cut this out of the episode.
Dun dun dun. Yeah, I mean, really, I kind of mentioned this, I think, in one of the services, but in my mind, the series we just ended, Anxious for Nothing, and this series on Jesus are actually connected. I see them as kind of like one long series, but in 2 parts. And the being anxious and worrying is the problem, and Jesus is the answer. And we got lots of different problems. It's not just being anxious or worrying, but Jesus is the answer to all of them. So I just want to take an extended look. I think there's, you know, again, there's a lot of crazy stuff that's been happening lately. You know, it's interesting, the number of times that the name Jesus was used yesterday in the memorial service. That was kind of like more of a rally. I mean, like 5 hours, but you heard people say, people very comfortably. In fact, one person even remarked, he's talked about Jesus more in the last 2 weeks than he has in his entire career. And so I think there's already, you know, some interest and intrigue about Jesus, and he's the answer. So let's try to understand more who he is, and then these 7 statements that he makes. You know, he says, I am the bread of life, I'm the light of the world, I'm the door, I'm the good shepherd, I'm the resurrection and life, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, I'm the true vine. Those are all help us better understand who he is, what he's done, what it means for us. So we're just going to spend 8 weeks talking about that. And how does 7 statements in 8 weeks work? Well,
Math.
Be there. You know, I was going back to, you'll have to find out. So join us on Sunday.
So, and also with that, if you're not, like currently, if you're not in one of our fall connection or community groups, we're going through all of those 7 statements in groups as well. But wait, there's more. If you are not yet in a group and want to be in a group, or if you are in a group, you should get one of these soon. We've got a journal to kind of help you during the week also chew on whatever that metaphor that Jesus said about himself, and how to apply that to your own life and your understanding about, because Jesus is whatever that metaphor is, I can now do X, Y, and Z. So if you needed an incentive, there's a free book if you join one of the groups. So we hope that this episode, wrapping up our anxiety series, was helpful for you. And we are looking forward to the start of this new series and to see all of you back here next week for our next Sunday Extra podcast.